OpenAI drops GPT 5.2 and immediately posts some of the strongest numbers we've seen from any general-purpose model. New records across professional benchmarks. Big jumps in coding, long context reasoning that finally looks usable at massive scales. Vision that's clearly more reliable, and magentic tool calling that starts to look production-ready instead of demo-ready. By every measurable metric, OpenAI chose to show GPT 5.2 is better than GPT 5.1. Significantly better. And yet, the response online wasn't celebration. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't even the usual hype cycle arguing about which lab is winning. Instead, what followed was this weird mix of skepticism, irritation, jokes, distrust, and outright backlash. Reddit threads full of people saying they don't care about the benchmarks anymore. Twitter posts questioning whether these numbers even reflect the real product. Developers saying, cool, but I'll believe it when I feel it. Long-time users saying they resubscribed and still don't trust it. That's the part that needs to be studied, because this backlash isn't about ignorance. Most of the people criticizing GPT 5.2 actually understand the numbers. They've read the blog post, they've seen the charts, they know how big some of these jumps are, and that's exactly why the reaction is interesting. Let's get one thing out of the way early, because otherwise this whole conversation derails fast. GPT 5.2 is genuinely stronger than GPT 5.1. This isn't marketing fluff. OpenAI didn't just tweak a few things and slap on a new version number. The data shows real gains. On GDPVal, which evaluates real professional knowledge work across 44 occupations, things like building spreadsheets, creating presentations, producing schedules, diagrams, and business artifacts, GPT 5.2 thinking beats or ties human industry professionals on about 71% of tasks. That's up from roughly 39% for GPT 5.1 thinking. And when OpenAI looked at speed and cost, GPT 5.2 completed those same tasks more than 11 times faster than human experts, at less than 1% of the cost. That's not subtle. In software engineering, GPT 5.2 thinking sets a new state-of-the-art on SWE-Bench Pro at 55.6%. That benchmark matters because it's designed to be harder to game than earlier tests, and spans 4 programming languages instead of just Python. On SWE-Bench Verified, which is still widely used in industry comparisons, GPT 5.2 hits 80%, up from about 76%. That translates into fewer half-finished patches, more end-to-end fixes, and less babysitting when refactoring large code bases, and the progress keeps going beyond that. On GPQA Diamond, a graduate-level science benchmark meant to be resistant to memorization, GPT 5.2 Pro reaches over 93%, with thinking just behind at 92.4%. On AIME 2025, which is competition-level math without tools, GPT 5.2 hits a full 100%. Frontier Math, which focuses on expert-level math problems, shows a jump from about 31% to over 40% on Tier 1 through 3 problems. Then there's ArcAGI. This is the one that made a lot of researchers stop scrolling. On ArcAGI 2 Verified, which is designed to isolate abstract, novel reasoning rather than pattern recall, GPT 5.1 thinking scored around 17.6%. GPT 5.2 thinking jumps to 52.9% and Pro goes even higher. That's not a normal incremental improvement. That's a slope change. Long context reasoning also takes a real leap. On OpenAI's MRCR version 2 evaluation, which tests whether a model can integrate information spread across extremely long documents, the new model reaches near-perfect accuracy on the hardest variants with up to 256,000 tokens. In practical terms, that means you can throw massive reports, contracts, transcripts, or multi-file projects at it, and it doesn't collapse halfway through. Vision improves too. On benchmarks like ArcAGI Reasoning and ScreenSpot Pro, GPT 5.2 cuts error rates roughly in half compared to GPT 5.1. It's better at reading charts, understanding dashboards, interpreting software interfaces, and reasoning about spatial layout and images. In side-by-side examples, the new model actually understands how components relate to each other instead of labeling random fragments. Tool calling is another quiet but important upgrade. On Bench Telecom, it hits 98.7% accuracy in multi-turn customer support scenarios. Even with reasoning effort turned down, it still outperforms previous models. That matters if you're building long-running agents that have to call APIs, pull data, run analyses, and produce final outputs without falling apart halfway through. So no, this isn't a bad model. This is probably the strongest general-purpose systems OpenAI has ever released, which makes the backlash even more telling. The first major friction point is something a lot of people are struggling to articulate: benchmark fatigue. For years now, every major AI release comes with a wall of charts. Each chart says state of the art, each one shows a clean, upward line. And at some point, those numbers stopped persuading people emotionally, even if they still matter technically. It's not that users think benchmarks are useless, it's that they've learned benchmarks don't always map cleanly to their daily experience. When people see phrases like run with maximum reasoning effort or X high reasoning, the immediate reaction isn't excitement anymore, it's suspicion. Is that what I actually get in the product, or is that a lab setting tuned to win an eval? You can see this all over the reactions. People joking about Goodhart's law, comments about models being trained to score well rather than to feel smarter, questions about token usage and whether OpenAI is comparing its best-case runs to competitors' normal configurations. Even when those criticisms are oversimplified, the sentiment behind them is real. Benchmarks used to signal progress, now they often trigger skepticism. Not because progress isn't happening, but because users have been burned before, which brings us to the second friction point. Trust damage from past releases. GPT-5 and left a mark. A lot of people remember the initial excitement, followed by subtle behavior changes, throttling, refusals, and what many perceived as nerfs. Whether every complaint was fair almost doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the expectation that formed afterward. Many users now approach new releases defensively. They assume the best version won't last. They assume something will be dialed back. They assume the model they test today won't behave the same way a month from now. So when GPT-5.2 arrives with impressive numbers, the first reaction isn't wow, it's for how long. That mindset changes everything. Once people expect degradation, improvements feel temporary by default. Even genuine gains get filtered through doubt. The third friction point, and arguably the most important one, is where GPT-5.2 clearly focused its improvements. Almost every major gain in this release points in the same direction: professional, enterprise-grade work. Spreadsheets, slide decks, agent workflows, tool calling, long documents, coding, data analysis. These are economically valuable tasks. They're the kinds of things that justify enterprise contracts and API spend. And GPT-5.2 is undeniably better at them. At the same time, many users feel that the things they personally care about didn't improve at the same pace: conversational warmth, creative freedom, flexibility, the feeling that you're talking to a collaborator rather than a system enforcing policies. A lot of people describe GPT-5.2 as colder, more structured, more corporate. Better at doing the job, worse at feeling pleasant to work with. That doesn't mean OpenAI did something wrong. It means they made a choice. GPT-5.2 feels like a model optimized to replace a junior analyst, not to be a creative companion, and for a huge portion of users, that shift is uncomfortable. Layer on top of that the ongoing frustration around safety and refusals, and the reaction becomes easier to understand. Many people aren't asking for chaos or unrestricted nonsense, they're asking for less friction. Fewer lectures, fewer unnecessary blocks, more trust that they can operate like adults. So when GPT-5.2 arrives with stronger reasoning but still carries the same safety tension, and with adult mode changes delayed again, the intelligence gains don't fully land emotionally. Even a very smart model doesn't feel smart if it keeps stopping you mid-flow. Timing also plays a role here. It's hard to ignore the context around this release. Gemini 3 lands and suddenly there's talk of code red inside OpenAI, priorities shift. Resources move, features like adult mode get delayed into 2026, and GPT-5.2 rolls out fast. That doesn't make GPT-5.2 fake or rushed in a sloppy sense, but it does make it feel reactive rather than visionary. Users can sense that difference. A model released to defend a position feels different from a model released to redefine the landscape. All of this is why the backlash matters, not because it means GPT-5.2 failed, but because it shows the criteria people now use to judge AI have changed. Raw intelligence is no longer enough. Neither are charts, neither is being technically correct more often. People care about how a model feels to use, how predictable it is, how much control they have, and whether the relationship feels stable. The reaction to GPT-5.2 brings friction and skepticism. It's users pushing back because their expectations have moved faster than their satisfaction. And that might be the most important signal of all. AI is starting to split into two paths. One path leads toward enterprise-grade systems optimized for productivity, efficiency, and economic output. GPT-5.2 clearly advances that path. The other path is about human-friendly intelligence, systems that feel collaborative, flexible, and trustworthy in everyday use. The real question going forward isn't whether models will keep getting smarter. They will. The question is whether the next generation can close the gap between capability and comfort. Because if intelligence keeps rising while trust stays flat, reactions like this won't be the exception. They'll be the norm. GPT-5.2 might be one of the smartest models OpenAI has ever released, but the response to it shows that intelligence alone no longer defines success. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.